We will get to this in the next segment because of the pod that we have. But which teams in the Big 12 are more fragile? Think about this. Which teams, in your opinion, right now are more fragile? Oklahoma State, Baylor, Kansas, or UCF, who's losing players like they're jumping off the ship right now with the transfer portal. We're starting to see that. Not just the quarterback from UNLV, a lot of other teams are starting to deal with that.
6 players already for UCF, including their kicker, Colton Boomer, who's the latest one. It just makes you wonder what's going on there. Like, what's the deal? Why not stay in? I mean, they've lost 2 games. Like, they're still in this thing. One of the games they lost doesn't even affect the conference at all. Like, losing to Florida only affects their morale.
Yeah,
like,
but their morale
as a fan base, and it seems low right now. So Gus needs a spark. Something's got to happen there.
Yeah, the Colorado game.
Weird.
The Colorado game, I think, broke them mentally. I don't know about all the other stuff, Craig.
I mean, yeah, the UCF transfers are unfortunate. Xavier Townsend a part of that as well. But I mean, the answer is Baylor, and it's not even close.
Yeah,
like that's the coach that's going to get fired if things don't turn around. Not Mike Gundy.
I'm sorry, I didn't bring up TCU. Go ahead.
It's Baylor.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe Sonny Dykes does get fired. That would be totally TCU to fire him and not wait 2 extra years to see if he pans out and just go grab G.J. Kinney or Jeff Traylor or whoever the hot name is. Yeah, TCU, it sucks right now for them. They are a mess. The culture doesn't seem like it's in very good shape.
You're right. And one of the things that happened – go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, one of the things that happened is they had a really nice start. The week before, they were down 28-7 at Iowa State and then got blown out. The best picture in college football yet this year. Jalen Jackson, the running back of the Cyclones. That's not like the angle makes it look different. That's the running back as a part of a running game that punched Baylor in the mouth over and over again. That little guy, among others, just had himself a game against Baylor.
I think he was the guy who frustrated them the most, by far. Like that, like not getting, like every time it looked like they maybe, okay, you've got a 3rd and 7, they're at a spot where they didn't want to throw, they'd hand off to him, he'd get the first down. You know, he was fantastic.
Yeah, he was really good. I mean, that was a good showing for him, and that's cool pictures. Thanks for sending that along. Like, going with our conversation, TCU's in a funk right now, and Oklahoma State's in a funk.
We're going to do that in the pod, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, going back to my answer, Baylor's the clear answer. I don't care how bad TCU's in a funk in Funky Town, or Gundy's losing his grip in Stillwater, or whoever else you want to throw into the mix. You can't throw Houston now. They're loving life. But I think it's clearly Baylor, and Iowa State put it on them this past weekend. It was a fun game in the beginning, at least competitive game in the beginning. Was still a close game at halftime, was a close game early part of the 3rd quarter. And you wondered if Baylor was going to have, that upset trick up their sleeve. But then it all just unraveled in the, guys, early to mid-3rd quarter. And from that point on, it was more of the same old song from Dave Aranda's Bears of, big, huge mistakes that are massively costly for you, the types of things you can't do on the road to beat a top 15-ish team at their place, especially when they've got an electric atmosphere. They know how to do the whiteouts right. Like, I see a lot of programs. They got, like, I'm like, where do you, like, what do your fans listen to during the week that they just showed up in the usual color? Like, everybody else is in white, and, like, here's this dude in purple, and here's this dude in green. It's like Iowa State, it was, like, all whiteout. I mean, they did it to what looked like pretty much perfection. There weren't these random, like, weird pockets of, like, just people who lost the memo somewhere along the way or whatever.
Or just don't care.
Or just don't care, which that's also like, I mean, have a little fun for God's sakes. Like, damn, you need attention that bad. But anyways, like, that seemed like it was an electric atmosphere. It was a probably more competitive game than a lot of Cyclones fans maybe anticipated, just given kind of the talk around Baylor right now. But ultimately, it was a dominant blowout win. It was the 2nd biggest win in that, albeit like quarter of a century long series between these two teams. So college football wise, that's not really anything major, but still 25-ish years of playing each other. That was the 2nd biggest win total, or winning margin, I should say, for Iowa State against Baylor. And yeah, they pulled away and left no doubts about who the better team was when all was said and done. So they're in a good spot right now. They are right there in the thick of things as far as being in the race for the Big 12 championship. And being 2-0 is a great place to to find yourself. So at 5-0 overall, I mean, they're right where you want to be and right where you might find yourselves, building off of to maybe going to win that first 10-game season in school history. They've never won more than 9 games ever, and they are positioned really well to compete for the Big 12, to compete for a playoff spot, to compete for a historical season. Mm-hmm. There's a lot in front of them, and that was a great win for them on Saturday. But, yeah, Baylor is by far the most in the mud because their coach is the one that's on the hottest of all hot seats, and they're the one that can't beat anybody that matters. They beat teams that they're favored to beat, and then anybody in the Big 12, bets are off. Probably not going to beat them, especially if they're ranked or any good whatsoever. Yeah, probably not going to win that game. It has been a year and a half of just nothingness.
2 years.
But of nothingness. Yeah. I mean, name the substantial wins. There's not one. There's a come from, there's the close kick against Cincinnati at Cincinnati, which you look back, that wasn't some great Cincinnati team. There was beating UCF in a game you were getting your asses kicked, and you were fortunate to come back. Thank you, Gus. And you won that game. And beyond that, you beat Tarleton. Okay. You paid them to beat them. You beat Air Force. Okay, that was a measure of revenge because they beat you in a bowl game and embarrassed you a couple years ago, but that wasn't the same Air Force team. You also paid them to beat them at home. So outside of the games you paid teams to come to your place to beat them, and even then that didn't work against Texas State last year. You have beaten the 2 newbies a year ago in games that basically came down to the wire, and you've won nothing else. Not a single upset.
You did
not
not
a
bring
big
up,
win.
You did not give him credit for Long Island.
I mentioned the teams you paid to beat. But that's all you've done in 2 years. You beat Cincy and UCF by the skin of your teeth, and you beat 3 teams you paid to beat. That's all you've done. You've done nothing.
No,
so you are by far in the bottom spot.
Since the middle of 2022.
Yeah.
Since winning in Lubbock and winning in Oklahoma and Norman, you have won basically nothing. And we'll get back. The Big 12 South pod is next. One note as well about if you get rid of a coach now. Well, you're going to lose the signing class, or you're going to lose. Who cares? I'm sorry. If the coach coming in can't replace who he wants, you think that the bigger schools care about whether you lose a sign? No, they still will end up in the top 10 or 20. I know Baylor normally is not ranked very high, even some of their best teams ever. But you have to make a move. You cannot be held hostage because of a signing class or the transfer portal.
Yeah, I've seen that random conversation. I mean, I don't think you hold anything together just for a signing class because they could all just transfer out after a year. So there's nothing. If this is the old days where you're at least getting them all for 4 years,
sense.
Sure. But this. You can flip it over in months, so it doesn't matter.
If you get the right coach, he can bring in his.
But I also don't know what doing it right now does any good for you either.
That's true too. Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah. I think there's that November 1st window is where you probably need to kind of tell recruits okay, this is where we're going. Yeah. So make up your mind.
Here's another thing. And Baylor, I've always been told this, has money when they need it. They have plenty of money no matter what we want to hear about the revenue. If they need the money, they'll need it. There's going to be a buyout for Aranda. There might be an expensive buyout for the staff. Maybe the incoming coach wants to keep some of them. That's part of the discussions. And, you're going to have to go to the portal. Well, the GXG's been doing that anyway.
There's also the house settlement.
Yeah, and that's part of a story about that was at least approved from the initial part of it today by the judge, and we'll get into that today a little bit more in a minute.
But I'm just saying that's another $15 million maybe
22.
that you're – well, if you want to pay 22. It can be – I would say on average, though, most teams will probably pay minimum $15 million, and then, some will pay 22 and go maxed out. I don't know what Baylor's plans for that are, but you do take that into account when you're also thinking about buyouts for Aranda or the staff or whoever. But you don't keep this together the way that it is just for a recruiting class that has the ability to leave whenever they want to. But I'm very intrigued by what they decide to do because the apathy is set in, guys. It's undeniable. It's just there's nothing of substance on the branch anymore. It's the same story, different Saturday, basically. And you have no faith they're going to go and beat anybody else remaining on this schedule. Even Houston, Houston beat them last year.
I said this in the pregame. Why can't they go do a Houston like what Houston had done the night before against TCU? There's drama in Fort Worth. They're unhappy in Orlando. And also in Stillwater, Gundy's fine, but there's a lot of disappointment going on there. So let's talk about a team out of all 4 of these teams in the pod. Texas Tech, 3-0 in the conference. I have to admit this. Late on Saturday night, I was kind of like falling. And they were up 18-3. I dozed off downstairs watching the big flat screen. I dozed off. I said, they're fine. And then I woke up, and they had won the game. I'm like, okay. Then I look at how they had lost the lead and found a way to beat Arizona, Arizona on the road in a tough place to play.
I got to say I was wrong about one thing. I said hit the over on this.
Yeah.
Should have taken the under. It hit the under, only 50 points on this, which is why you won't see me doing videos where I'm like, these are your big bets for the weekend. I'm not that guy. But, yeah, no, it was impressive. I didn't make it through this one, or Miami and Cal either. Like, it was just too much. Couldn't make it. I had to save it for the Cowboys game last night. But, yeah, they fought it off. They didn't, whip the ball around the yard. Taj Brooks had 3 touchdowns. And as Taj Brooks goes, so goes the Red Raider offense. So
part of the Big 12 Players of the Week, by the way, this week.
That's kind of how it is for them.
Yeah, I mean, Tech totally outplayed, outperformed, outcoached, outclassed Arizona. I was really unimpressed with Arizona as much as I was impressed with Texas Tech. I really felt like for a team hosting a big night game, and we'll get to their pod later, I was just very underwhelmed by how they showed up to that game, whereas Texas Tech kicking off at 10 o'clock Central Time on the road where they're not typically very good. They seemed like a team that was ready to go in there and change the narrative, and they did. They flipped the narrative, and they're off to an incredible start at 5-1. Maybe the hottest team in the league. I know BYU could have something to say about that. I know K-State, is in the mix as far as the teams that people believe in still. Even Utah with Cam Rising, but Texas Tech has to be right there in that conversation. They had an embarrassing loss to Wazoo, where you kind of wondered, especially after the way the opener went against ACU, of just what this team was even going to be and how they were going to operate moving forward. And they've reeled off 4 straight wins, 3 in the Big 12. A 3-0 start in the Big 12 is absolutely massive. And guess what? They've got 2 weeks off, or they got a week off, and guess who they get to play? At home, Baylor. So good chance they're 4-0. Then they play TCU. There's a good chance they could be, so like you start looking at it, and because of the way they started off, they are in the driver's seat. They're in the driver's seat at 3-0 in the Big 12, along with, a BYU and Iowa State. Don't want to forget them either. But this wasn't just like Taj Brook run the ball. They were dominating the first half. It didn't necessarily show on the scoreboard as far as like a blowout looking total, but 18-3, it was pretty dominant. They were getting stops on defense. Arizona offense was just funky. Tech's just got so many like Matt Rule qualities. Like they're just always super physical. They're always trying to rip the ball out. They always seem like they're playing harder than the other team. It felt that way on Saturday night. It felt they were better coached than the other team. It felt they had showed up and were ready to pull the big win on the road that had been so elusive, and it got dicey because Arizona did mount a comeback. They were able to, force some punts. They had a couple fumbles that Texas Tech can't afford to do that in other games, or else that'll probably cost them. But they were able to overcome that, which I think speaks volumes about the culture, and they were able to, just stick with it, and eventually Taj Brooks breaks through and ends it for you. But they've got a really good wide receiver. Michael Hudson had a huge catch that should have been a touchdown, but he fell down. Caleb Douglas was great. Like Kelly's really good. Like they've got an offense that's really doing a lot of really good things, and they got a defense that plays hard, even though they're not great or even veteran in some spots. And Arizona, like McMillan had some yards, but he had a huge fumble in that game. That was a great play by Texas Tech's defense that swung the momentum back around. So it was a game of waves, but Texas Tech just stayed in the fight and made the biggest plays at the biggest moments. And I was just thoroughly impressed by just their whole demeanor, because I think that's the kind of culture win that is going to serve them very, very well moving forward. And they've also got some talent as well. So I think that was huge to go and beat Arizona.
You know what I think? You mentioned some of the identity or the character. They play hard.
Yes.
Now, I mean, so, you see that with teams that are not winning, but there's a rhyme and a reason to it. I mean, they play like this is their last game.
They don't play clean by any stretch of the imagination.
They're not
and they're not great across the board by any means.
But you can make up for not playing clean with effort.
Well, dude, the fumble, like they're trailing. No, they were trailing 19-18. They kick a field goal after Arizona could have extended the lead. They miss. Tech makes theirs. So now Tech's got the lead 21-19. Arizona gets the ball back, and there's like less than 3 minutes to play. There's 2.5 minutes to play in the game. Tetero McMillan gets the ball across the middle, is running down, and strip him, fumble. It was clearly something they had seen on video to some extent based on the conversation around that play. But you make that play, and boom, he fumbles, and it just flips right back around. You go down and score a touchdown, and the game, for all intents and purposes, was kind of over then because Arizona needed 2 scores, and they were only able to manage 1 with the time remaining. So, like, that effort right there, like, just stripping McMillan, that won you the game. Little plays like that, even though that wasn't a little play, but plays like that won you the game, and there was a lot of those plays throughout this game.
And if the defense needs to make a play, which they don't make a lot of them, but the pick last week against Cincinnati, we have a guest in 5 minutes. He's also got an interview deadline, so we're going to go to the next one up. What in the hell? I saw former players whining and bitching and moaning about something Kosh Kazadi said to them. One, they're losing. Houston beat them up on Friday, which was shocking to me. Right now, Sonny Dykes has himself a handful of mud.
Yeah, he told us about a culture problem that they had a year ago. I wonder if that still exists. Like, if you didn't really solve all that. They've got a quarterback that I think most everybody would want, Josh Hoover. He's really talented.
He turns the ball over too much, though.
Yeah, absolutely. They had turnover, they had fumbles the other night. They had interceptions. They did everything wrong. Houston got a boost from Zion Chris, and TCU didn't have a defensive answer for him. They don't have defensive answers for a lot of things, but they're an absolute mess right now. There's not a ton of chemistry there. They've got some good things going, but defensively, they get behind it like they did, and then they just don't see the fight.
There seems to be more than just what's on the field, though. There seems to be a lot of circuit.
And the ex-players were complaining because they were getting yelled at by the assistant to the head coach asking who they were. Well, we're former players on the sideline, but that's the kind of cultural thing that's going on right now is you've got those types of things happening that typically don't happen anywhere, where you got guys yelling at players that are alumni on the sideline. So, I don't know if they didn't have passes or what, but we also know Kosh Kazadi, and I can see that. I can envision that without any problem whatsoever. Josh Hoover's good, but he turns the ball over too much, and that's a killer for them. He's easily their bright spot, but when he does that, like, it negates a lot of the good from that. They can't run the ball to save their lives. This run game's non-existent, and they've got some really talented receivers, but you can't just have a couple 100 yards of receiving with a couple picks and no run game and expect to win most games when your defense isn't that good either. So, yeah, they're a mess across the board, and I don't know what the ultimate issue is, but it does feel like the culture's a little bit rotten, and it's not necessarily carryover from last year, but maybe it is, or maybe it's an entirely new problem. Regardless, I think TCU fans rightfully have a lot of concern about the Dykes era, if you will, and just what that looks like moving forward.
They have the off week, and they may need it to just kind of like let everyone out, let some steam out. Then they play at Utah, home against Texas Tech, and then the rest of the schedule follows that. Oklahoma State.
Ugh.
They're always pretty steady with Mike Gundy. They have some they trip a little bit here and there, but man, whoo!
Well, we're not
West
going to hear
Virginia
about
came into Stillwater and obviously win that game.
We're not going to hear about, trying to spin. Like, well, the Utah game was actually close, like we heard at the end of last week. Remember that? Like, oh, well, yeah. That wasn't a blowout. You lost. Okay, well, then this – what was this? This was a blowout.
They've lost 3 straight games. They've lost 3
This
in a row.
is a blowout. They're 0-3 in the conference. They are just without life, without hope, and without any excitement, certainly right now. Not only did they get blown out, and this was a real blowout on the scoreboard, it happened at T-Boone Pickens Stadium, where they've now lost 2 conference games, where that used to be like a fortress that you hardly ever had anybody roll in there. And it's happened with relative ease now twice by Utah and West Virginia. Alan Bowman's not a good quarterback, even though he's had more practice than anybody in college football, not named like Cam Rising at this point. He's not very good. They had to replace him, and you've already done that twice now, so I don't know how you keep going back to that. Ollie Gordon's a non-factor, got injured. And who knows how much we even see of him moving forward because they don't have a run game with or without him. So why is he going to go out there and get hurt and injure his draft stock? They still have really good wide receivers, but that's about the one bright spot on this team. I don't know what the deal is there. This is not at all what people imagined when they ran it back, and there's not a whole lot of signs for them turning this around and being that much better down the stretch. So you go to Provo next, night game. There's some winnable games after that, but that's what's up next. And so you're staring straight at 0-4 potentially here in a couple weeks. But they also are a team that needed a break, and they're getting a break this weekend.
Yep.
And like TCU and Baylor, they certainly need it.
They need to have some come-to-Jesus type meetings between the staff, the players, and I guess even within the athletic department with former players too.
And I don't want to mention just the offense. The defense stinks.
Yeah.
The defense got just totally thrashed by
80
Garrett
points
Green.
in the last 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, they got ran all over. Great win for West Virginia. We'll talk about them more in depth in a different pod, but that was a great win for Neil Brown, and that was an awful loss for Mike Gundy, who is not on a hot seat because he's earned so much, goodwill, but you do wonder if, like, he's losing his touch a little bit with them, and this is not the first time you've been, in a position to wonder that. It's not even probably the 100th time people have wondered that after certain losses over the years, but this is bad. Like, they are not good, and they don't look like they're going to be that much better moving forward because there's not a magical quarterback replacement that's coming in or a magical defensive replacement.
When you look on their schedule and you go to whatever site and you look at their 3 games, back-to-back-to-back L's, and that's just with Utah, with K-State, and also West Virginia, 38-14 at home. And you got to wonder right now where they are, but they need a break. And they're about to get one, as Craig, you mentioned, and at BYU, which right now is as steady as anybody in the Big 12, Iowa State, K-State, and we'll see what Utah is themselves.